top story this half hour. Hamas has this morning released 2 more hostages, hours after the most intense Israeli strikes on Gaza since the conflict began. Local news is reporting that the families of the 70 and 85-year-old women have been notified of their release from Hamas captivity. Both were abducted from their homes in southern Israel. Their husbands remain in Gaza.
We agree that the top priority has got to be going after Hamas. There's no daylight here. We also think it's important for humanitarian assistance to flow and for our hostages to get home with their families, and we're working all 3 of those things.
It comes as 20 more trucks carrying humanitarian aid passed the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza overnight.
Thanks for your company, folks. Hamas has moments ago released 2 more hostages, hours after the most intense Israeli strikes on Gaza since the conflict began.
Brett McLeod is in Tel Aviv with the breaking details. Brett, what more do we know about this hostage release?
All we have so far, Sarah, is a statement from Hamas saying they have released 2 female hostages on humanitarian and health grounds. This was brokered again through the government of Qatar, where Hamas leadership is based, as well as the Egyptian government. The American government doesn't negotiate directly with Hamas, but uses them as intermediaries. And the indication is that these are 2 women that Hamas says a couple of days ago it offered to release, but Israel refused. At the time, Israel called that false propaganda. Now, this ties in with the fact that the delayed ground war in Gaza is believed to have been asked for by the White House to allow hostage negotiations to continue, to give them every chance of success, particularly for the 50 foreign nationals currently being held captive. White House spokesman John Kirby was asked about this a short time ago, whether the US is putting pressure on Israel.
We have been crystal clear with our partners in the region, including Israel, that we want to see humanitarian assistance flow. There's been no change to our posture on that at all. But as I said, I think to Steve's question, we're not dictating military terms to the Israeli Defense Forces. They have a right and a responsibility to go after these terrorists, and they certainly are going to do it in a way that they choose to, that they believe is appropriate to the threat. We're definitely going to support them in terms of providing the capabilities for them to continue to prosecute Hamas terrorists.
And the aerial assaults on Gaza continue. Israel has said they hit 320 targets in 24 hours, trying to hit Hamas infrastructure. The Palestinian Authority there says more than 5,000 Palestinians have died during this conflict.
All right, Brett, thank you.
Breaking this hour, 2 Israeli hostages are right now in the process of being released by Hamas following mediation talks with Qatar and Egypt.
Let's bring in former Pentagon operative and White House advisor Tony Shaffer now. Tony, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, this is, of course, a positive step forward. What more can you tell us about this agreement?
Well, it's always positive for the hostages to be released, but there's a kind of a negotiation going on about who comes out first. This was, I think, a 79-year-old and 85-year-old 2 ladies came out, and God bless them for being out. But there's a larger issue of what's really going on. Hamas is doing this the way they are, Sarah, because they want to buy time. They believe by slowing down the inevitable Israeli attack, they can build momentum against the attack. That's what they're trying to do. And there's a negotiation between both the United States that the Israelis are not keen on, as well as the Israelis being offered by Hamas a triage, like, hey, we'll give you these for that. And it's a difficult thing, but any hostages to get out is always a good thing.
It sure is, but as you say, I guess this was designed to prolong those attacks, but over the last 24 hours, there have been plenty. Does that make it even more sticky for the US?
Oh, it does. And that's the thing. And as I mentioned in our pre-interview, I was meeting with folks in the Pentagon this past week. And the United States is facing a number of dilemmas, to include Joe Biden basically wanting to buy more time at this point to get more hostages out. And you're balancing that with special operations force things, people being able to go in and grab them, and obviously the ground offensive. So, Carl, it's very complicated, and I don't think anybody has a clear understanding or idea how to move forward safely at this point.
We know there are still, of course, a number of hostages being held by Hamas. Aid is making its way into the besieged Gaza Strip at the moment. How does the US weigh this up now? I mean, they want to get aid to the Palestinians. They want to release those hostages. It's a very delicate dance here, diplomatic dance.
Oh, they did, Sarah. And look, the United States just provided, or is in the process of providing, $100 million for humanitarian support in that region. Problem is, often that money goes to Hamas and doesn't get to the right people. So that's one dilemma. The other dilemma is Hezbollah and the Iranians, and what would happen if this war extends out. The Israelis have already hit Syria. They've already hit some targets in Lebanon on their northern border. So, Sarah, the biggest concern we have, and the United States has two carrier battle groups on the way. One is already there, one's on the way, is the potential of expanding out of the current footprint. Tony Blinken has said the United States will not accept any expansion, but nobody believes Joe Biden or his administration is credible. That's why the Arabs rejected the overtures last week of Joe Biden.
Can you explain something to me as well?
Sure.
Qatar, no, that was a big sure.
I'll try.
That was a big sure. Look,
I'll try.
Qatar brought some of the Aussies home, Israeli Aussies, back to Australia recently. We know that we've learned in the last couple of days Hamas's leadership is based in Qatar. How does that all work?
Well, the leadership are very well enriched. That's part of the issue, Carl, is that we, the United States and other nations, have been essentially enriching the leadership. And a lot of folks criticize the Biden administration for not engaging in essentially continuing a two-state solution discussion. Every other administration has always engaged in some way of kind of letting the steam off to maintain a diplomatic negotiating process. And that's not happened at this point in time. So God bless you guys getting your folks out. I'm glad Qatar's being helpful. But it doesn't resolve the larger issue of this conflict going back literally over 100 years.
Israel has bombarded Gaza, striking some 320 targets overnight. The Palestinian Health Ministry saying at least 436 people were killed.
It comes as more aid crosses into the enclave, with Hamas warning all hospitals in Gaza have now run out of fuel. Let's go live to our Europe correspondent, Brett McLeod, who is on the ground in Israel. Brett, the humanitarian crisis worsens amid this conflict.
And you only need to look at these images to see why. Israel says it was targeting Hamas infrastructure, particularly those notorious tunnels which run for hundreds of kilometres under the city, when they were making these latest airstrikes. But hundreds killed, according to Hamas-led Interior and Health Ministries. They say that's around 5,000 Palestinians who've been killed since this conflict began. We did see some more aid trickle in today, but again, it's just a drop in the bucket. Some 20 trucks got through the third convoy. Israel has said it will allow continuous rolling out of these trucks, but it's barely enough to maintain lives in a severe situation. Now, there's also a lot of talk about why the Israeli ground invasion hasn't occurred yet. The indication is that's from pressure from the White House, who wants to continue the hostage negotiations, particularly for 50 foreign nationals who were kidnapped and taken from Israel into Gaza. White House spokesman John Kirby was asked about this a short time ago, whether the US is putting pressure on the Israeli government.
We have been crystal clear with our partners in the region, including Israel, that we want to see humanitarian assistance flow. There's been no change to our posture on that at all. But as I said, I think to Steve's question, we're not dictating military terms to the Israeli Defense Forces. They have a right and a responsibility to go after these terrorists, and they certainly are going to do it in a way that they choose to, that they believe is appropriate to the threat. We're definitely going to support them in terms of providing the capabilities for them to continue to prosecute Hamas terrorists.
The Israeli Defense Force has actually increased the number of people known to be hostages in Gaza. It's gone up now to 222 people.